Today, I want to kind of talk about managing standards, and I kind of wanted to figure out, what would be a good opening story, and I wanted to bring up my daughter. She's 3 years old, and this is Isabella, and she was playing with her shape puzzle game here, and I thought, being dad, I'm going to try and outsmart her a little bit, and I said, well, what if you wanted to take this cube and put it into a octagonal shape? What do you do? How do you do it? Without skipping a heartbeat, she goes, well, Dad, that's easy. You have to make 8 sides and you have to cut the corners. So me being dad thinking, oh, wow, she's really smart, right? So dad thought, well, maybe this is an opportunity. Dad can get new tools and bring things down to the workshop and start modifying it. So I said, Sabella, what do you think? Do you think Dad should bring this down to the tool shop and buy more tools? And she goes, yeah, you just need to have a sandpaper. So with that, I'm thinking, wow, she's really bright. She simplified the solution, cut the corners down, and use what we have, sandpaper. So, coming into the presentation, it's about, I wanted to kind of approach this as to using tools that you already have access to, rather than necessarily, customizing it with a custom program, which, those have their own benefits as well. But a lot of what I want to cover is what you already have access to. So the first thing I want to talk about is, well, what standards are we talking about, right? We're talking about standard layers, annotation styles, tables, dimension text, and leaders. How do we manage these things? Maybe customizing our user interface is the other part of those CAD standards. We work in silos sometimes in terms of our different departments, and maybe each department has their own settings and their own, user interface, or even a custom ribbon or commands that is specific for that. And this is, again, these are all tools that we can, create or modify within the out-of-the-box, product of AutoCAD, right? We get into, talking about like custom tool palettes, being able to generate, these tool palettes that, for needs of our designs, or, for those designs where we have solutions already in place that we can just drag and drop, mainly like libraries and things like that. Speaking of, other interface like things, maybe it's the application variables, the behavior of AutoCAD. Do we want the command line to prop up, or do we want, to enable the mirroring of text or things like that? Then we can, maybe libraries, like block libraries. We go to McMaster-Carr, we go to, maybe cadblock.net, the website, and download, files that has, standard items, so as you can see on the screen, like couches and stuff like that. We're not going to recreate those. So, things that we use over and over. And then we get into like maybe plotters, customizing our list to include just plotters that we have in-house and not a list of plotters that are default plotters, right? Getting into plot styles. So this is what, encompasses that whole, what is the AutoCAD standard? What are we talking about? There might be more that, I'm not listing here. But these are the things that I want to kind of get you to think about as we go through this presentation. Now, I'm going to go ahead and, exit out of my presentation and start showing you some of these things in AutoCAD, okay? So here I have a sample project that we've loaded, it's got our CAD standards, including our layers. And let's take a look at the layers, for example. We have all these different layers, and, one aspect of managing layers is being able to organize this. And, some of us may have just 10 layers, while others may have 300 layers. I mean, I'm sure you've run into maybe outside source files that come in maybe from an architectural background, or, even with mechanical, you might run into where you have a whole list of layers. With good naming conventions, it can go a long ways in terms of managing our layers. So as you can see on my screen here, here's a whole list, and something that Autodesk does out of the box is that it creates these properties filters. So here's one that says all layers that are used, but then you can actually customize it for, well, all things that are, architectural. If you notice, I've kind of used and put together a layer standard based on national CAD standards. So the A represents the architectural, E, for example, represents the electrical. But if we expand this, you'll see that I have yet another property filter that allows us to narrow down our list. And these are just standard naming conventions that I've used. So, creating a property filter allows us to narrow down what we want to see. So by right-clicking and choosing out, I'm going to go ahead and put for the name dash new, and it shows me all the layers that matches the naming standard. So it's a way of being able to organize our layers so that we can work under the different layer filters. Now, speaking of layers, one of the things, let me go back and bring out all the layers, right? These are part of the standards, right? So maybe, for your organization, you have a set of standard layers that you use every time. Let's expand that a little bit and talk about annotations. You got annotation styles that may have your annotation style needs, and then there's other ones. And each of these may serve a different purpose. Maybe I have some notes that utilizes the handwritten styles here. I have a dimensions text here, and they have different fonts. These things take time to build. If you expand that and think about dimension styles, leader styles, table styles, it adds up. And if you're having to open up a brand new project file, starting with populating all of these, you're wasting a lot of time, trying to build out your standards in each of those drawings, correct? So just, what can we do to, speed up that process? And that's where we get into managing our standard using things like templates, right? So if I were to go and open up my CAD templates, you'll notice that I'm using a sort of standard directory with all these different folders in place, and I have one that's called templates. And here's my standard template here that's either a DWG, or I can change the property filter to show me a DWG, which will hop over to a directory that's configured within AutoCAD to the default template directory. So again, I'm going to just kind of click on my standard directory, kind of navigate back down, and here's my Hagerman, template that I've created. And you'll notice that there are things like custom title blocks in here and layout, but maybe one of the aspects of this is that there are new layers that I need to add to this. So I can go and create new layers so that I can add to my template, and then simply save this as a template. So I go and configure all of these, the names, whether, the colors, how they're going to be displayed and things like that. I'll go and configure that and then simply save this as a template. That is the same thing with annotation styles, right? So all of the different dimension styles, if they are going to be a standard, you want them to show up here. Now, maybe some of you already know that you can work with the template, but what happens when you run into a situation where you're working on a project, and through that project you realize, oh, there's a layer that I can utilize or I need to add, and maybe you have a standards committee within your organization, you discuss that and you realize, wait, yeah, we can really use this layer. How do we get that layer over there to our templates, right? And the answer is, well, you could copy the object that has that layer setting and then paste it over there onto the DWT and then save it. But then you're kind of left off with, well, you got the remnants of that block or the object here, and then you have to go and clean it up. But what if I showed you another way that you can do that? And that is simply using something called the Design Center. This is a little nifty tool because it allows us to basically go and navigate to a file and look at its layer settings. So if I double click on the layers, I can see all the layers here. And you can see how some of these layers are not listed in my current layer. So what I could do is just simply drag this and drop this right into my document or my template. I can grab a whole series of these and drop them in here. And that would allow me to manage the list of layers that are here. So if I were to come in here and I take a look, you're going to see there's frame 025, frame 050 from this other document. So this is another way that we can, manage our layers, but also dimension styles. Again, if you create this on the fly and you realize, wow, we really could use this, you can actually use that design center to take just like we did with layer, drag any of those text styles into your template. And then when you're done and everything is up to date, you simply hit the save button. And of course, if you have Vault like I do, and you want to get that little dialogue, but without Vault, you hit save and your template is now up to date. So it's really nice to be able to manage our templates, but also be able to, as we go along in our just day-to-day work, to go back and update that drawing template. Speaking of which, when we are working with templates, I start off with a new drawing. I'm given this list of templates, and these are the out-of-the-box template. Now, I mentioned earlier that, well, I could create a folder structure that can give me access to my templates under a folder that I called standard. But what if I wanted to just make it a simple and easy, one click and go? And that's where we can bring up the AutoCAD options. Within the options, we have the file tabs here that allows us to configure different settings for AutoCAD. For example, I could go and set up, my templates, which I'll show in a minute, but I can also set up maybe the tool path or tool palettes location, or maybe my plotter configuration. I can configure all these different elements to streamline AutoCAD to certain, options. So, you're not having to deal with a list of different printers or plotters that you have. Maybe you only have 3 plotters in-house. You only need those 3 plotters rather than a whole list of, 20 standard plotter styles that are there, or plotter configurations and settings. So you can really narrow that down. Another popular thing is the automatic save. So a lot of times when using the option to automatically save right here, it saves files every 10 minutes. And sometimes individuals do not want them to be saved. By default, it's saved in the local temp file. So maybe they want to put it somewhere else. So again, it's all just being able to kind of come in here and modify that. So I'm going to go ahead and just show you how we can simply change our template directory to the standard directory. So what's really nice is I've already saved this as a folder here, and just to kind of clarify what this is, if I were to right click on any folder, or I'm sorry, not right click, but if I drag this folder and pop it in here, I can create sort of a shortcut to the places, and then I can also remove it from here as well. Removing them does not delete anything, it just removes it from this list. So this is a shortcuts list. So it's the same list that you'll see in the open file or save file or save as. You will see the same list here. So if I click on this, I'm going to go back and choose the templates folder as the basis for where my templates are. And so from this point on, when I do a Control-N, you'll see that it now goes straight to that templates directory that I have stored somewhere, on my, maybe it's a network shared drive. So those are the type of configurations that, we can make to make AutoCAD work for us and not against us, right? So we don't, a lot of times when we're trying to, when I come back to the story of, with my daughter and that puzzle piece, the shape game, it's, modifying is really awesome, but if you have to go into custom programming, like getting a third-party solution in place to work, it can be expensive. But that's where some of these configuration I'm mentioning can help with alleviating or getting AutoCAD tailored to what your organization needs. Because after all, this is about your workflow. So another thing that I like to bring up is that there are tools built into AutoCAD that allows us to monitor for these changes. So, for example, I can set up, a template to kind of give me the standard annotations, the standard template, the standard dimensions, all those things, including the list of layers, if I had not mentioned that. But I can also set up something called a, let me bring it up. There we go. All right. So I can bring up or save it as a drawing standard or a DWS. And what this allows us to do is to have a medium that will come and tell us, hey, this file that you're working on, just FYI, it violates our company's standard. It's not a do or die moment. It's not, oh, error out, and I'm going to, close out of this. No. It just says, hey, just so you know, there's some violations here. And so out of the box, if we were to implement that, the first thing is I would save the DWT file because that is our standard right now to this point. But I would save this file as a DWS. Then within AutoCAD, under the Manage tab here, I can come and configure what is my standard DWT file. And under the settings, there's a couple of behaviors or a couple of things that can happen. And by default, it will actually display on the status bar down here any violations to your standard. If I choose the second one, for example, the moment that somebody adds a layer, for example, I will get a dialog here just warning me, hey, you're changing this and it doesn't match the standard. What would you like to do? And it usually gives you two options: to continue or to work with whatever layer that are there. So I like the third option because it just gives you a bubble down here. And so right now there's no bubble. So watch what happens when I start creating a new layer. I get a standard violation immediately. And if I go and click on that, it will let you know, okay, there are some layers that are problematic, but not only that, it's giving me other things that I didn't even think about. Take a look, for example, at the top here. It says, oh, the dimension style, the HNC arc, that is a non-standard layer. Which one of these do you want this to, oh, you know what? It really needs to go to my architectural dimension style. That's what I really meant it to be. And I can tell it to fix. Now here comes the layer list. It's found a couple more. So I can come down here and say, oh, I can ignore them right here, ignore this, and yeah, that's the standard. That means I need to go and update my DWS file to match this. And then I can go next, and it just goes down the list of all of the standard items that it's earmarked to look for. Dimension styles, leader styles, table styles, layers, and things like that. So again, this was not, not an additional little checkbox that you do when you do the installation of AutoCAD. This is built-in functionality that AutoCAD has that maybe, you haven't utilized. So let me go ahead and say okay to that. So again, that is, just utilizing the CAD standards part here. Now, what's really cool about that process is that it also does something else. We can actually, from here, go and manually run the check, but it also allows us to use what's called a layer translator. So anytime you have a list of non-standardized layers, we can actually go and translate those to other layers. So if there were any layers, now in this case, all of my layers have been either ignored or because I went ahead and closed out of the dialog and basically marked everything for ignored, it doesn't have any suggestion for me. But if I was in violation of that, I would have the list of the DWS files here. But if I go and hit load here, you can see that I can bring in those layers as well, right? So you can see how there's different layers. So I can say, you know what, this layer 1 should have been the furniture layer. I'm going to go ahead and map it. And so down here would be a list of layers that are mapped from one to the other. And then I simply hit the translate, and it will go and translate. Now, what I'm getting here is not saying, hey, saving this settings here. Basically, what it's talking about, saving the settings of the mapping, right? So I basically mapped a layer called layer 1 to furniture, so that in the future, if I were to ever to run into that similar thing, I could save this, and all I have to do is load this setting here. So, but I just want to translate it only, and so now that layer 1, you can see it's gone from the list up here, and anything that was on that layer got translated to the furniture layer. So it's a really, a nifty tool of how we can manage our standards, and having AutoCAD to come back and give us that feedback and say, hey, I'm still violating, you can see right here, right? Now, part of that, these standards that I mentioned earlier is, being able to customize our user interface. So if we've gone from talking about layers, annotations, templates to help us store those that information and then be able to reuse that, to DWS being able to utilize that to monitor our standards. But now we talk about standards like user interface. If you have dual monitors, sometimes you have, panels that you put on the second monitor up here. Sometimes you have custom ribbon, like I added this one, custom command with a custom command up here. So a panel followed by a command. All of these are items that you're going to want, you spend a lot of time customizing that, and you spend a lot of time, tweaking your screen. We need to save that, right? So within the options dialog on the far right end of it, we have profiles. This allows us to export our current settings, which includes any of the settings here. And we, if there's any, configurations that we've changed, we can save that and then be able to import those. Because once we export, and I'll go back to the profile here, once we export from this computer onto a shared directory, you can go to any of your coworker's machine and simply hit the import button, and all the configuration is already set, right? When we talk about user interface, workspaces down here, we want to be able, you can access it down here or up in the top here, there's this little drop-down menu here, and we have to enable the workspace, which is this gear. So you can see that I have one I called my workspace. I don't know how to spell apparently, but you can change to different workspace settings and it will load. So all of the things that we want to customize and save and tailor for our needs, we need to be able to save down either as a profile file to save all the configurations and the mappings that we've done in terms of where the template files are, where our tool palettes are, or if we're going to be working with Workspace, we want to save this as a profile. I'm sorry, a workspace setting, so that we can recall those, right? In addition to managing those standards, we talk about blocks, right? So blocks is another way that we have standard. When we take a look at, the sink, for example, what if the sink is something that we use over and over? Am I going to spend my day or a couple of minutes drawing all the fillets, all the circles, the rectangles to redo this? Or should I write this out as a block, right? And that's where you look at the window, for example, this is a block. And if I hover over it, it will actually report back as a block reference, and it gives me some block information. So where do blocks come from? Blocks come from you. I can highlight this. I can create a block from this. I can also utilize the write block method, which I believe is under the insert, go into, right here, and write block, which is essentially a save as. So if I go through this process and create a new block, I'm going to go ahead and take the object and convert it into, actually, the object I selected. All right. Let's go ahead and specify an insertion point, specify where I want it to be, where I want that file to be. So it kind of boils down to, us saving our blocks to a standard directory. And what is a standard directory, right? Where do we save that? Well, if you have a company network like a data drive and you want everybody to have access to this block, you're going to want to save it to a folder structure that you can get access to, or everybody can get access to. But let's take a look at what a block is. What makes a block? If you notice what I highlighted here, I highlighted the letters DWG. That is essentially what a block is. It's another DWG that we're inserting this one time into this current drawing as a block reference. Sure, I can explode it and return this, return the entity that I've loaded into standard lines and polyline circles and things like that, but it's just a standard DWG. Now, I bring that up because, again, coming back to being able to manage our block libraries, you can see that I created a standard directory with a block library. I have different folders that make up these different, sections of the library, such as the kitchen. So there's a few kitchens things there. There's a few furniture items here, all DWGs. You might go to McMaster Car and download, files. They will be DWGs as well. You might download, an entire file. Let me go ahead and show you this. This is from a site called cad-block.net, and they have a whole list of all these different couches, these different blocks. Each one of these are blocks. But between the management of having individual blocks, as you see here with individual DWGs, and managing these, you may have a different approach to that. While I can insert all of these files into a drawing using the insert command, there's also a tool that's built into this that kind of makes things a little bit easier. And that is, if I go to the Views tab, it's the tool palette. The default tool palette is usually listed with like maybe 20 or so, maybe 30 different tabs. They'll have things like annotations, drawing, hatches, and you can see I actually have the hatch and fill still listed here. So maybe some of you've seen this. What's really cool about a tool palette is that, as you see here, I can customize it to my needs. I do not have to, work with what was out of the box. I can customize this. And because of the AutoCAD options that allows me to define where the tool palette file is, I can bring this or put this into a shared directory that all can just populate the same tool palette just by pointing AutoCAD to that file. Now, coming back to this, I can take this entire list of blocks and drag this right into that. And as you can see, I have all of these blocks loaded in here. And what does that give me? It gives me the ability to simply click on those and bring in my blocks from any drawing. Now, again, I'm kind of using the DWT here as an example, but let me just go ahead and open up a new drawing, for example. So here's a new drawing. I'll go back. There's my tool palette. That doesn't change. The way that we insert our blocks using the insert command, this is subject to what's loaded in the file, or what was the recent file that I've accessed to, or I went to, or I may have to go and browse. So if we look down here, there's content drawing, there's libraries. I may have to browse to the directory where, again, that's where the folder comes in, and I might be able to go and navigate and find the block that I want. But if it's for, blocks that we use day in, day out, you'll notice I got my kitchen blocks here. I've organized it with refrigerant plan, refrigerators with elevation, dishwasher. Let's go into, say, sofas and things like that. These are kind of like standard things that you may be used to. But what about paper space items? Maybe you have notes or stamps that you placed in. Now this is going to be really tiny, but here it is. I have a release stamp that I put in. That was all populated here, right? And again, these are just drawings that I created the text and then just dragged them and dropped them in here. Maybe general notes, or even your title blocks could be populated into here. So if I were to click on a block and drag this into here, oh, I have to save the drawing. So that would help. Let me save it, because what ends up happening is, let me just call this title block drawing. What happens is when I try to drag this block into my tool palette, this becomes the sole source of that block. If I right click and I go to the properties of that, you'll notice that it actually maps straight to that TB drawing that I just created. Okay. So, you don't want to do this for general drawings that you do, because you might archive those, which is why it's imperative to have a really good structure or directory where all of your blocks reside. Okay. So I'm checking my questions panel. So it looks like, okay, no questions. All right. So we went through, managing layers, templates, using drawing standard files to manage our layers or standards to kind of allow the program AutoCAD to let us know, hey, you're in violation. To now we're dealing with block libraries and being able to create these tool palettes. Now I mentioned earlier about how in the options here I can specify my tool palette file. So if I were to come in here and take a look at that, right here, you can see that it's actually at my quote unquote shared directory under that the folder structure that I just did. And so if we take a look at that really quick, I'm just going to kind of show you how simple it can be when managing the palettes. So if I were to go into my support, my tool palette, you'll see under the palette folder, here are the ones that I just customized. And then here's a list of the default ones that I just, basically, I put them in a zip file because I don't need them. The point being is that this directory, as you populate the directory, whether it's on a shared directory, it updates for everybody to have access. So what happens is, as soon as somebody opens up AutoCAD, if their AutoCAD is pointing to this directory, they will instantly get the new palette that was created. Speaking of which, who do you trust to generate that, right? Who do you trust to manage those? Through general securities, I could set up, or IT could set up on the server, securities that allow certain group of people to have access to this information. Same thing with, the tool palettes, template, or maybe you have a font library or even a block library. Only certain people can have access to that. So being able to kind of lock down security is probably another aspect of this. And I'll talk about that just a little bit, but I wanted to kind of show one more thing about, managing the block libraries. So when you download, blocks, a lot of times you run into that, let me bring up, I think, kitchens. You run into where there's one file that has every single block in here that you need. And so, when you run into that, saving this into that same directory where you have it, you can take each of these and drag them into your block. So if we go ahead and put the refrigerator here, kind of just dragging this, just grabbing it by the the geometry line and populate that, right? So you can have any source of file or any number of files, and it's not restricted to one tab to one file. All right, you can have another file from another directory or another, as long as it doesn't get overwritten or misplaced. You can drag those blocks directly into your tool palettes. So now I want to kind of hop back over to that where I was just touching. Okay. We're talking about securities and how do we prevent, I have tools down here that's telling me that, here's one right now just saying, hey, you got a system variable that doesn't match your settings here. And it just gives me that same balloon down here, just kind of let you know it's all collective down there. So we can see down here that, it's that mirror text set, and, currently it's set to 1, but the preferred is set to 0. So if I come in here and I say just reset it, it'll fix it, and then now this drawing is now set so that it doesn't have, a change in that variable. But, coming back to the security, right? This is where something like, having the management of IT to kind of help you with. But what if you needed to offload that? Because, trying to work with IT sometimes can be a little daunting, and sometimes this email back and forth. You start off with one person, the next thing you know, you get an email that's running around, and by the end of it is 10, you got 10 emails going back and forth, and, 5 more people. And the one thing that you just needed was, I just need to update the template. I can't do that because now I gotta go for this. And that's where, allowing a tool like Autodesk Vault comes in hand, because with that, this kind of offloads a lot of the administrative stuff that IT is typically accustomed to and usually are overloaded with, to certain people that could be assigned to an administrative group within here. So as you can see here, I have these folders in red, which are template folders. And basically, if I were to take a look at the security here, the setting, I have engineering. They can download the file, they can read it, they can't modify or delete anything. The administrators, however, the people in this group, can modify it, but they can't delete it. Now, why would you not want them to delete it, right? Well, when you think about deleting, what does that mean? I mean, bye-bye for good, right? So maybe, preventing them from deleting it, but rather than putting them into, a state of, that it's not visible, using life cycles and things like that. But one of the cool aspects of the Vault is that when we're dealing with the standards, you can check a file out. So here's an example. Here's one that's in a revision A. Maybe that, that's not something that we're going to be utilizing for, all template, but you could set up multiple versions. So every time I check out a file from AutoCAD to update it, I can check that back in. And let me just kind of show you how that works. So from within AutoCAD, I'm going to go ahead and open up that that DWT file. Let me go ahead and log in. While I'm looking up here, can CTB be customized? The color, the plot styles, yes, they can be. I will show that in a minute. But yes, they can be customized, and you can adjust their pen settings based on your plotters. Now, something to be aware of is that CTB files are plotter dependent. They, unfortunately, if you get an HP, DeskJet 6800, and then you get the next year, the new version, which is the 7000 series, the HP DeskJet 70,000 or something. Even though they're just an upgrade, they'll have different printer heads, it's not always the same standard. So sometimes those CTB files has to be converted or tweaked based on those plotters. And the only way that you go through that is, basically printing one line at a time and then comparing those plot and making sure that it matches. But yes, I'll show that in a little bit and what that entails. So, coming back to our templates here, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to a DWT. I'm going to go ahead and take ownership of this, which allows me to edit it will download this into my local directory. I can come in and edit the file. So once again, you can see that there are some properties, it's telling me there's some properties that need to be updated. I'm going to go ahead and allow it to update that. And I'm going to make some changes to this. The only workflow difference that I've done so far is I'm going to go ahead and just kind of put in a couple here. All right, just layer 1 and layer 2. The only difference I'm doing here is I just checked out a file from Vault. And the only reason you do that is so that you take ownership of that. And now I can make these changes. I just added 2 layers. I'm going to go back into here and check that in. And I can, add comments that says, add, 2 new layers to the template. Added. All right. So I'm going to save that drawing, check it in. It's going to check in this file. And if I go into my vault here, all right, and I do a refresh of that same file that we were just working, now you see there's a version 2. So what this gives me is the ability, oops, I added those 2 layers, and that isn't right. I can go back, and you see here's my comments here as to what's going on. I can go back and check out this file and set this up as the current file, thereby creating another version with the correct information, which kind of offloads that whole administrative task that you normally have to go through with IT, having them to restore files that were overwritten. And that's the same thing with blocks. So I can bring in blocks the same way and take ownership and make changes to them and utilize Vault to create those different versions of these files as necessary. So if I need to have a version 1 of of a file, I could go and pull technically that version file and create a new file from that. In fact, let me just kind of demonstrate that with this one since I can come over here, and if you'll notice, I can actually use the copy design functionality to go and create another copy of this file and insert it into the vault. And I can do the same thing with the blocks. So managing, at a secure level here with only certain people having access to this directory where others can only read it, it's a win-win situation because now I know that the integrity of my files will be protected as well as my templates. So to answer the question about CTB files, okay, the CTB files here, when you are adjusting them, if you hit this button here, you'll see all of the different colors and then their pen setting. Now, once you've configured all those things, of course, that's part of the standards. You want to save the files, but it's automatically saved into your specified plotter configuration. So if I were to take a look at, for example, the options here, go into the file, and go into my plotter support tab. In here, if I were to look for my styles here, this is the directory that I was just modifying that list. So when you are tweaking those CTB files, you can tweak them at the shared directory, or that's number one, make sure that they're on a shared directory so that everybody has access to it. The second thing is that everybody has to be configured with the use of profiles where you can load those profiles in. Everybody uses the same configuration and they're looking at the same directory, and you'll have this, the standard list of CTB files. So that was a very good question. Thank you. So that pretty much wraps up what I wanted to kind of cover with managing our standards with AutoCAD. Let me go ahead and bring up the presentation. So, what would be the next steps for you? Staying, connected with Hagerman, being able to, follow up with, services and upcoming events. Maybe you're not familiar with our website. We do offer some blogs. We have hubs. And then some of the things that is really cool is the Hagerman product line, which includes things like being able to use Project Connection that allows you to basically create duplicate files within Vault and still have it tied into the master file. We have things like Backup Connection, which provides automatic email notification of the Vault. But there's also other tools that we have that allows you to use outside of the Vault, so you're not having to have just Vault for that. So yeah, I would encourage you to take a look at our website and look at our services. We also provide services to help you build out these custom solutions. So maybe what I've covered today isn't something that you're comfortable with, or you don't know what direction to go in, or what would be the best choices for your organization. Reaching out to us, or through our 800 number, or you can reach out through email, or just your Hagerman representative. So, if you have, for example, Julia Grant's or Tiffany Castle's email, you can just reach out to them and kind of query for a session to talk about possible custom, not custom, but more of a tailoring AutoCAD to your needs. With that, I would like to open up to Q&A if there are any questions. Please feel free to use the question and answers panel to ask your questions. All right. Well, I thank you for your time and taking this time out of your busy schedule to attend to this session. I hope that it was informative for you. And I would switch the floor over to Ashley.
Okay, well, thank you, Dan, for the presentation. Yes, I will let people know that also if you have a question later, you can simply reply to that confirmation or reminder email you received from GoToWebinar. We can get those to the right person to get your questions answered. Once again, there will be a short survey that will pop up as we close down, and also a reminder about the email that you will receive tomorrow with a recording of today's presentation. And I do see a question that has popped in. Dan, if you want to cover it, feel free.
Yes, I do. How do you manage the order of the tool palettes when they've been updated? The user's local profile AWS has been created but not updated per the tool palette. So I'm not sure what you mean by the order, unless you mean by the tab order, but the order of these tabs are generally created at, when you right click and you can create them at that spot, but you can also move those tabs down. So I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to, but so this is how you can restructure those tabs. Now, if at the file level, if you were to have the tool palettes here, this is just going to give you the list of tool palettes that you have available. I could add other palettes in here and then have them repopulate into this. If you add a new tab, move it up and down, doesn't get updated on the local machine. It's just put at the bottom. I see. That is something I can definitely look in with you separately, and then we can take a look at that and see if that's we can solve that. Let's see. There's another question that pops up. Can you demonstrate creating a layer filter? Okay. So just really quick, the layer filter, when you are creating a layer filter, if you right click on the parent up here, you can create a new one. Either it's a group filter, which are manually selected filters and you can drag them into place, or you can click on the new properties filter and then generate your properties filter based on the values that you want. So maybe it's a name, for example. I can say all things that are existing, and it will give me a list of all the layers that are existing. Another popular one is, all right, layers that are frozen, right? So if I have any layers that are frozen, this property list is dynamic. So if I choose to, let me go ahead and show you a couple of the, so I'm gonna turn these into frozen layers. Now, if I go into that new one that I just created, it shows me a list of items that are frozen because that was the property that I filtered based upon. So with that, let's see, is there another question? Can you apply settings from standard to an already existing drawing, similar to layer translation? For example, do a mass change of text styles across the drawing or leader styles? I see what you're saying. So you're looking to update the text style. The layer translate doesn't do that specifically, but it's for layer translate. If you're looking to update the styles, and it's already in place, the standard, when you, I'll show you right here. Sorry, manage. When you use a DWT file, any standards, including annotation text styles that are in violation, I'm going to try and demonstrate that here. It pops up here. And when you run into, and the first is going to show me layers, so I'm going to go ahead and do next. Here's that text style here. This is where you would tell it, hey, you know what, this style here should be the annotative. And you hit fix, and what that will do is it will update that for it, including the styles. So that's how you would handle that. It's not so much the layer translator. Alrighty. Well, thank you very much again for attending. I'll go ahead and pass the floor back over to Ashley.
Okay, well, yes, thank you for attending, everyone, and we'll go ahead and wrap things up for today. But thanks again for attending. Thanks, Dan, for the presentation. Have a great day, everyone.